How many of you think of yourselves as creative? Okay, great. Usually when I ask that question in a room full of adults, only about half of them raise their hand. And a lot of adults who don't think of themselves as creative, it goes back to a time when they were 8, 9, 10 years old, and somebody told you that you couldn't draw, or some other artistic activity that you just weren't very good at. Maybe in school, your clay ashtray that we used to always make, all made for our parents, right? Didn't turn out as well as the kid sitting next to you. And so you were like, I'm not a creative person. I'm going to stick with the books. That's it. Artistic ability is certainly part of creativity, but it's not the thing that we're foremost concerned with at the D.school at Stanford. What we're really interested in is what our founder, David Kelly, calls creative confidence. How willing are you to try something different? How willing are you to do something that maybe you don't think you're particularly good at? To work with people who are very different than you and come from different expertise? To show work that is not complete and polished, but is unfinished and rapid and rough and a work in progress? Because the reason this is so important is anytime you want to create something unique or innovative, it starts with doing something different. That's right on cue. I'm kind of floored that I teach at Stanford and that I work at the D.school, because this was not something that was at all on my career radar. I'm not an academic. I spent many years in the world of newspapers, and I was a designer. I designed newspapers, mostly at the Washington Post. And my job in that role, the way I viewed it, was to pull together the work of world-class reporters and editors and photographers and graphic artists, and to get us to work together to create something that could communicate the importance of the story or the investigative series in a way that would have more impact on the reader than if we had just stayed in our own silos. And I remember about a decade or a dozen or so years ago, when the digital disruption really came to the newspaper industry, a colleague who was then the creative director at NewYorkTimes.com was giving advice to print designers like me who might become web designers. And what he said was that print design is fundamentally about narrative. What you're doing is you're pulling together all of these elements and you're creating this cohesive package in order to drive the reader through the story. Web design is not about narrative. Web design is about behavior. You're designing the system and the interface in a way for the user to be able to determine their own path. Now, since I've moved into education, that example has really stuck with me. And I think it extends way beyond just print design versus web design. So I teach organizational design at the D.school, and I run the fellowship program there. And basically, I think of narrative design, or trying to drive the reader through the story, is really similar to hierarchical organizational systems, right? They grew out of the industrial age. The leader's job is to set the vision for the thing that you're trying to create and assemble a team to create that thing in the most efficient and high-quality way as possible, right? But in the digital age, there's different types of organizations. And I think what we're seeing is that emergent organizations are coming forward. This is a very different thing for leaders. This is not necessarily about setting the outcome or setting the vision. It's about creating the conditions for the people who work within the space to come up with their own unimagined outcomes. Okay? So the reason why this is important is because if you're only trying to accomplish the thing that you're trying to accomplish at the outset of your process, you're limited by what that thing might be. That's one person's vision or a small group's vision. But if you're creating a process and the conditions for people to work together in a way that, in our case, is centered on the user, the person you're designing for, then the number of outcomes that you'll come up with is exponential. One of the ways we describe this at the D.school is we focus on innovators, not innovations. Because if you unlock the potential of the innovator, the innovations will follow. Now, this is what we try to do in the fellowship program as well. And I want to give you a quick example of one of our fellows who's here tonight, my friend and really my brother, Jason Maiden. So Jason was an advisor to the program for the first couple of years, and this year he's a fellow in the program. And Jason is from Chicago. He grew up in Chicago at a time when Michael Jordan was the king of the NBA, right? And Jason, as an athlete and as a designer, his dream was to design Air Jordans. When he was 20 years old, he became the first design intern at Nike. By the time he was in his mid-20s, he designed one of the Jordans that came out that year, right? By the time he was in his early 30s, he was the global design director for the entire Jordan brand. Normally at that stage, you're like, wow, man, you are set, right? You're at the top of your game, you're at a design-driven company, you're doing exactly what you wanted to do with your life. But at 33 to 34 years old, Jason felt called to use his skills in an unconventional way. He felt that he was meant to do something different. And so he left Nike, and he's now working to raise up the lives of Black and Latino youth, both through their consumption behavior to take on issues in childhood obesity, and also in inventing new skills for their survival in American society. This is exactly the kind of thing we try to do. And this is not something that, as great as Jason is, that he'll be able to do on his own. What he has to design is an emergent system where the people that want to work with him are able to come up with multiple outcomes that will scale beyond anything that Jason could do on his own or with his own team. So the reason why I wanted to talk to you all tonight is because this is a highly accomplished group. Many of you are world-class designers. Many of you lead in teams and work at companies that create really fantastic products. What I want to ask you is, what are you going to do different? How are you going to take the things that you've learned in your career so far, the things that you've been rewarded for to get to the level that you are, and say, how can I apply this in an unconventional way? And if you're a leader of other people, how can I create the conditions for them to be able to do that? Because when we do that, there's no limit to what we could create together. Thank you.